Maria Bartiromo once said, oil is a very important component of economic growth. Keep this in mind as we discuss today with one of our guests, the importance of oil in fueling the global economy. My name is Dr. David Oualaalou.
And my name is Elizabeth Ann Stewart.
And you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict. So today, as we always talk about it, Elizabeth, a lot of our viewers always ask, well, guys, can you bring some guests?
Yes.
Well, guess what? Today we have one of those guests.
Okay.
Somebody who is very, very familiar with the oil industry, somebody who understands the trends of where oil is going. And we're going to be having a very, very interesting and wonderful conversation. So would you please introduce our guest so our viewers would have an idea?
Thank you, David. So it is with great pleasure that we have on our show today Art Berman. And Art Berman is someone that we got the pleasure of watching live. We watched a live presentation that you gave, and we were so blown away by it that we just knew that we had to bring you on, Art, to talk to our viewers. So let me tell you a little bit about Art. Art is a petroleum geologist. He has worked in the oil business for 40 plus years. 20 of those 40 years, he worked for a major oil company. Then he became an independent consultant. Art holds a degree in Middle Eastern history in addition to being a geologist. Very interesting. And I feel that probably serves you very well. Art advises his clients on a host of issues, from exploration and production work to funds management. It's fair to say that Art has a combination of both geopolitics and economics.
Oh, great. So we are so grateful to have you on our show, Art, and thank you so much for carving out time for us. So we're not going to waste, we're going to dig into this because we got a lot to cover. And we want our viewers to get so much of your insight. So how about if we start our conversation, Art, by just getting your take into to what degree do you believe geopolitics have on oil prices, if any?
That's a good question.
Oh, well, they definitely do. Obviously, it's oil it's not only a global market, it's the largest commodity market in the world. But more importantly, energy is the economy. People have a funny idea that the economy runs on money. In fact, it runs on energy, and as does all life, by the way. I mean, this shouldn't really be a complex concept for people. But basically, money is nothing more than a claim on work. And most of the work in our society today is done by oil. So money is just it's a proxy for oil. And so for people who have an amusing idea that we need to get off of oil, and by the way, I'm not opposed to that at all. I am an environmentalist, and I care deeply about the climate. And I'm not here to promote any particular opinions that I have about that. All I can say is that I just don't think that people understand what they're signing up for, because I am right. I hope I can persuade your viewers that I am. If oil is the economy and we get off of oil, then the economy not only ceases to grow, but will experience negative growth. And I think if you simply cut it off there and said, well, you guys are signing up for getting off of oil and other fossil energy, how do you feel about negative economic growth? I think some very large percentage of those people would say, wait a minute, I didn't know about that. Tell me more. So that's where we're at. But the geopolitics, obviously, the United States is a major producer of oil and natural gas. Most of the oil in the world doesn't come from the United States, even though that is true. Saudi Arabia, the other Persian Gulf countries, Russia, those are all really big producers. So we're dealing with a global market with all kinds of different political and cultural agendas. And so something happens. I mean, right now we're talking about bringing Iran back into the international community. That will mean another 1 million+ barrels of oil per day, something like that, into the supply. That will have a very large effect on supply and price. So all of these pieces have to fit together. Having said that, I think geopolitics is less of a factor today than it was, say, a decade ago. And the reason for that isn't that geopolitics has become any less important. It's that we have apparently or seemingly a lot more oil than we did before. And so when oil was viewed as a scarcer commodity, then any small change to the supply anywhere in the world would have a dramatic effect on the price of oil. Now we move forward to 2019, and the main refinery in Saudi Arabia was attacked by a drone or whatever, probably from Iran. And the price of oil went up a few dollars, and a few days later, it was right back to normal. Had that happened in, let's just say, 2005, I mean, the price of oil would have gone up $30 or $40. That's the difference. So if you don't have a lot of money and you have a big expense, you freak out about it. If you have plenty of money and you have a big expense, you hate to pay for it, but it's not that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
So geopolitics hasn't become any less important, but its immediate effect on the price of oil has apparently been muted a little bit in this age of apparent abundance.
Yeah. Well, that was why back in 2014, I think, or 15, when the prices plummeted, there were some countries worrying so much because a large portion of their GDP depends on the oil sales. Like, I remember at the time, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Venezuela, Iran to a degree, Iran because of the sanctions and so forth. So it was always that notion of, okay, is it just the supply and demand that dictated the prices, or was it a political event within whatever countries that has that influence on the global oil markets?
Right, and so this is another kind of a radical concept here. People that aren't familiar with with oil markets, supply and demand are obviously important. However, the most important factor is the market's sense of supply urgency. And who is the market? Well, I mean, we talk about the market as if it's a person, and in fact, it's all of us. But for instance, right now in the United States and elsewhere, natural gas prices are extremely high. I mean, relative to what they've been, and they stay high pretty much regardless of what the supply demand situation is. And this has happened in all commodities because the market is not paying so much attention to what's happening today as it is worrying about what are we going to do for natural gas supply next winter. And so that makes obviously, again, supply and demand never goes away. But markets use price in the oil and gas business as a signal to producers to start drilling more wells. And so if we raise the price, and again, it's not a committee who decides this, it's our collective understanding of what's happening. If we raise the price, then maybe we can get these guys to drill some more wells. And that's what's been happening here, really since since April of 2020, when prices collapsed, for a day even below zero, if that's even possible to understand. The markets have, looked and said, oh my gosh, with so little money going into oil and gas exploration and production, we're going to have a big problem out there somewhere. And so the price has been going up and up and up. And if you read the the newspapers or the trade journals, you never hear anybody talk about that. It's going up because supply is tight, or we've got vaccinations, or trade talks are going well. Journalists always have to have some causal effect that happened today. No, the real reason the price is going up is because markets are worried about there's not going to be enough oil in 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, or whatever. So supply urgency, or the market sense of supply urgency, affected by supply and demand for sure, but not necessarily in the time domain that people are thinking about. That's the key to understanding prices.
Yeah.
So I've heard you speak on this before, but this has always been very interesting to me. Can you dive a little bit into because U.S. foreign policy? I don't know that this is a surprise to too many people, but U.S. foreign policy, especially in the Middle East, seems to be founded on oil and on the relationships required for oil stability. Can you speak a little bit to how did that happen and sort of where you see that going in terms of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East specifically? And then I'd like to talk a little bit about U.S. foreign policy with China and some of the other things that are happening in terms of, I know, David, you talked about the fact that the Saudis built the refinery, yes,
in China, yeah.
So can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. Well, that's a very important point you bring up, Elizabeth, and the importance of oil in foreign policy goes back a lot farther than we're going to talk about today. But just to give you a little bit of interesting background, the obscure or the somewhat obscure Archduke, whose assassination supposedly started World War I in 1914. This was a guy who was running some, Bosnia-Herzegovina country in the Balkans. And why was that important? Well, because the Germans were building a railroad that went from Berlin to Baghdad. Now, why in the world were the Germans building a railroad to Baghdad? Well, because they saw that Germany doesn't have a lot of oil, never did. Oil wasn't a crucial component of the world economy back then. But thinking ahead, Germany wanted to have a connection for oil. Well, this Archduke, he wasn't on board with that. And so the Kaiser called his buddy in Vienna and said, why don't you do something about this? Well, that led to the assassination. They needed the right of way. I guess they got it. They also got World War I. But so here, more than 100 years ago, even before very many countries were using oil, you might say World War I got started, at least indirectly, because of oil. But fast forward to World War II, and Franklin Roosevelt, after we won the war, started a commission because he didn't understand why we won the war. I mean, he was glad we did. And the commission was very clear, and that was that the United States had better access to petroleum than Japan or Germany. And it's very difficult, as you might imagine, to run an army. They have a lot of good access to oil. And so Roosevelt, being the kind of forward thinker that he was, when he got done with Stalin and Churchill at Yalta, dividing up the world, his only stop on the way back to the United States was in the Red Sea to meet with the king of Saudi Arabia on a U.S. aircraft carrier to cut a deal. And he said, look, we will guarantee your sovereignty if you will guarantee us oil supply and security. And ever since then, regardless of what textbooks say or what you think you learned in school, everything about U.S. foreign policy really centers on the Middle East. But if you don't agree with that, everything about U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East has always been about oil.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, there, the second President Bush was criticized for invading Iraq because he was embarrassed that his father didn't get the job done, et cetera, et cetera. And that may be true, but Iraq is after the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Russia is the fourth largest producer of oil in the world. And that whole conflict started because Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and was, burning oil fields. So it's always about oil. It always is. And if you believe that oil is the economy, well, is there anything more worth fighting for than
oil? You're right. You're right.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
No,
go ahead,
guys,
Elizabeth.
well, so I actually wanted to dive a little bit into where you see that going in the future. Do you have any predictions on foreign policy in the future? Now that you did bring up that we're in an age of oil abundance, which is, I think, ironic in its own way, because we're in an age of oil abundance as the world keeps talking about trying to get off of fossil fuels. So where do you see foreign policy changing towards the Middle East?
I don't.
That's an honest answer.
That's an honest answer.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, the last three presidents, including the current one, Obama was, he, among all the other things he was doing, he was focused on trying to rearrange our alliances in the Middle East toward Iran and somewhat away from Saudi Arabia and our traditional relationship with Israel, which has nothing to do with oil. And whether or not that was, a smart thing on his part or not, we won't get into. Trump came into office, and I think the very first foreign visit he made was to Saudi Arabia. Was that a coincidence? No, I don't think so. Trump was more involved with oil policy to his discredit, because he didn't understand it very well, but leave that aside, than probably any president that, in my recollection, he was probably too involved, but, he was always doing it. What was, other than getting control of the pandemic, what was the first thing Biden did? He wanted to revive the talks with Iran. So you can spin those discussions and decisions and events any way you like it, but to me, it's always about oil. I mean, that's why we are doing what we're doing, and that's, you just look at it. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious.
Yeah, absolutely correct. So let me shift to another key important aspect regarding oil here, and this has to do with China consumption. We cannot ignore that. No one in a right mind, especially when you are when one pursues or follows what's going on geopolitically, you cannot ignore the Chinese market. Now, I did some digging into that stuff and find out that some estimations by the IEA, the International Energy Agency, estimates that China's consumption of oil by about 2030 will be about 16 million barrels a day, give or take.
Well, and David, since your last book, didn't you do some digging and you found that maybe Kazakhstan?
Oh, those for the
yeah.
The only thing about the Kazakhstan were not developed yet. So the
got it.
So, Art, for China, given the need for them to really maintain fuel in their economy and the need for the oil, where do you see that trend going with China?
Well, China's in a very bad situation. They had a lot of oil, which was discovered long before they were a large consumer, and their oil supply is declining, and I'll never say they will never find any more, but they haven't been very successful at that in the last 10 or 20 years. And so here's this country who is either the number 2 or number 1 economy in the world, depending.
Yeah.
And again, oil is the economy, and here's a country that doesn't have enough oil. The United States is, we're the first economy, and we're a big oil producer, so we're in better shape. We also have the reserve currency of the world. So if you're China, what are you going to try to do? You're going to try to compete around your disadvantage. And so, China talks a big game about, we'll replace the dollar with the yuan. That'll show you. And good luck with that. I won't. So I'm not an economist, so I don't really want to get too deeply into that. But again, that's a lot easier said than done. They've tried to establish their own futures contract, and we don't know where that's going to go. But let me just say I'm skeptical. I mean, these things happen regularly. So China is at a disadvantage, and they know it. That's another reason that they're pushing renewables so hard, and they have a huge advantage there because they're not bound by legislatures or budgets, or they can produce solar panels and wind turbines at a loss if they need to try to dominate that market. Same with electric cars, and so they're pushing that very strongly. And that that I think that's what any competitive country would do. You recognize your weaknesses and you try to develop or play to your strengths, and I think that's what China's doing.
Yeah. But still, Art, I had some conversation with some individuals in the financial market, and the what I got from the conversation is that China is not planning on making the yuan sort of replacing the dollar, because they know the risks that comes with it. I mean, I could be wrong, but all the indications, or at least what I looked into, it suggests to me that they are not wanting to do that. What they are aiming at is ensuring that at least the energy transactions they are conducting with certain countries. That's the one that they wanted to do that in the yuan to basically go around the SWIFT system and avoid any sanctions. That's what I gathered from those conversations with those individuals.
Well, and again, good luck with that. I mean, the oil is denominated in U.S. dollars.
In U.S. dollar, you're absolutely correct.
You want to change that? Well, I'm not saying you can't, but good luck with that.
It won't be easy. It won't be easy.
Yeah.
There is no way. I believe in that. I believe in that. So, what about the Arctic, Art? Do you see? Yeah, the Arctic, because it has a lot.
Great question.
The Arctic, do you see any, I mean, I know both Russia and China are investing in some building of pipelines and so forth for natural gas. Do you see that impacting the global market somehow?
Oh, no, not really. Largely because of what you just said. It's natural gas for the most part. And if the world, and Elizabeth, to your point, we talk about abundance of oil. Don't get me wrong. I mean, oil is a finite resource.
Right,
Yeah.
right, of course.
It's not like we've got a supply that's going to last for 1,000 years.
Right.
Forgetting about our climate concerns and renewable concerns. I mean, we can go through all the oil we know about in a big hurry. And in fact, the world has not been replacing reserves for the last 25 or 30 years at an appropriate rate. So that's a separate conversation. All I really want to say there is it was 10 or 15 years ago when peak oil was a big subject, and appropriately so. And then we started developing all of this unconventional oil, both with so-called shale or tight oil and oil sands, which have been around for a long time. And so we bought ourselves about 10 years, and we're getting to the end of that 10 years. So I don't want to give the false impression that we have more oil than we're going to need. Sorry about that.
No, of course, and I think that this is a great sort of segue into that conversation, because there is an enormous amount of lip service going on about getting off of oil, getting off of natural gas, getting off of fossil fuels, and it's been a conversation, but it yo-yos back and forth in the geopolitical realm. People talk about, oh, that's very important, and yes, our country's going to do this, and maybe we're not. So can you explain exactly what's going on there, and why is it so difficult for the world to actually get off of fossil fuels? Because I think it's something we all want. Many of us want. I think there's some people who don't want that.
As the country singer Patsy Cline famously said, people in hell want ice water. And that's pretty much what I think about that. And again, I'm an environmentalist. I take climate change extraordinarily seriously as a scientist. It's not a conversation we want to get into right now, but we cannot get off of oil, at least not in any sort of a timely way, without some really, really serious economic consequences that I don't think that most people understand. And if they did understand, I don't think they would be very enthusiastic about signing up for getting off of fossil energy. And so the point is we look at the growth in economic prosperity in the world, which has mainly been since the end of World War II. In some countries it was a bit earlier, but let's just say that was the case. And what are the reasons for that? Well, if you ask most people, they would say, oh, it's technology. Look what we've done with transportation and computers and No, it's not that at all. I'm not saying. Those obviously contribute. But the number one reason is the world converted its energy consumption to oil after World War II. And oil is by far the most productive source of energy we have. And so, for instance, the amount of energy in a barrel of oil, so we're talking 42 gallons of some nasty liquid, and if you convert measure it and convert that into, kilowatt hours or joules or calories or whatever you want to do, with all the appropriate considerations, that converts to a minimum of like 4.5 years of human work in a barrel of oil.
Wow.
And you can't beat that. So why is the world much more prosperous than it was 75 years ago? Because now we're using something that every barrel, and we use 100 million barrels of the stuff a day. Do the conversion. That's like having, 500 million or billion slaves. we don't we don't want to do that, but we have fossil energy slaves.
Yeah.
And so if you wanted to replace that that army of oil workers with something else, well, you can always do it. But if you wanted to replace that with, let's say, solar energy, well, you would have to cover the earth with solar panels. It's just not as efficient. The conversion, obviously you can't measure you can't take a barrel of sunlight, so it's not a fair conversion.
Well, and even in that case, isn't part of the issue that the technology for capturing solar energy just isn't equivalent to what we get from a barrel of oil?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think the technology gap is how to store the energy that we create. I think I don't see that there's a lot of room for improvement on the either the photovoltaic or the thermal solar technology. I mean, if you want to know the truth, plants had us beat like 300 million years ago. I mean, plants have the most effective, most productive system of converting sunlight into energy, much better than humans ever will. That said, the problem is that we create this electricity from the sun and from wind, and to start with, that doesn't cover all our energy needs. It doesn't even cover half. Yikes! What do we do about that? Well, the simple answer is an awful lot of those energy needs are transportation. Oh, well, that's simple. We just convert everything to electricity. Well, okay, that's great. How long does that take? What does that cost? Things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the issue with electricity, which is to say wind and solar, is you need a way to store it. That's the technology that we need. If we could store everything that we create and have immediate access to it, that would solve a lot of problems. But just to give you, and again, I'm not arguing as an advocate of oil or or an opponent of renewable.
Of course.
But I mean, let's just take a simple example. I'm driving and I'm almost out of gas. And oh my God, maybe I can make it 5 miles to the next exit. Luckily for me, I did. I don't know how. I pull into a gas station. I take 5 minutes to put gasoline in my car, and boom, I'm off for another 400 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What if the same thing happens to you in an electric car? Same situation. You're running out of power. You get to a charging station. Luckily, you made it. Now what? Well, now you can sit there and rot for 4 or 5 hours while your car charges.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the guy in the gasoline or the diesel-powered car is another 200 miles down the road. That's not an impossible situation to live with, but it sure is inconvenient. And so the problem with electricity in general is that it's not very efficient in how it's transferred from the source to where it's used. Whereas oil or natural gas or coal or wood, I mean, as soon as you got it, bam, you're there. So again, people say, yeah, I want to get off of fossil energy. I want this, I want that. Well, okay, so how about if you're in the middle of some football game and all of a sudden the power goes out? You're not a very happy camper, are you?
Right. Right.
On your microwave and there's no electricity. You're cursing the power company or whatever, because we live in an on-demand world. People are used to on-demand everything. So if everybody's willing to be a lot more patient and accept those kinds of delays, that's a step in the right direction. The larger problem, though, is that you can look, and anybody can Google this, just Google oil consumption and GDP. and go to images.
Yeah.
You will find more images than you want. There's a 1-to-1 correlation between oil consumption and gross domestic product.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put that link to our viewers, Art, so they can take a look at it. I'll link it to the descriptions at the
Yeah,
bottom.
I mean, it's like the correlation is very close to perfect.
Mhm.
And yeah, fine. You want to take the other side. Well, we can replace all that oil consumption with something else. Yeah, maybe you can, maybe you can't. How long does it take? What does it cost? And what's absolutely incontrovertibly true is that right now, the solar and wind contribution to the world's energy consumption, total energy, is about 5%.
Wow,
Which is
that's
staggeringly small.
small.
And knowing human nature and the way things move and momentum in society, what will it take under any circumstance, no matter how much we want it, no matter what if it's mandated by law that you can never build another internal combustion engine and you have to you're required to buy electric vehicles. To get from 5% to 20% is still going to take a decade or two. To 20%.
Well, I mean, that's mass upheaval, right? That's a mass change in how the entire world is run. And right now, I personally don't see it being taken seriously enough to get to 20%.
Well, my point is that if all of a sudden tomorrow everybody in the world took it seriously enough to get there, I'm still not sure we could get there. What do you do with the 500 million internal combustion engines in the world? Do you just let them sit? I mean, most of them work just fine. The other issue is what do you make solar panels and wind turbines out of? You make them out of metal. You make them out of all kinds of fancy components. How do you get those you mine them. How do you do the mining? You do it with diesel. All right. You get the minerals out of the ground, and now you need to, most of the time, you need to ship it someplace to get it manufactured into a product. So you want to make steel. You mine the iron ore in Chile with diesel. You put it on a boat to China. What do boats run on? Diesel.
Diesel.
You go to China, you go to a manufacturing plant. What's the manufacturing plant run on? Electricity. Today, most of that's coal or natural gas. You make a product. You need to sell it. Where are you going to sell it? You sell it in the United States or you sell it in Europe. Put it on another boat. Send it across the ocean. It gets picked up in a port by what? By a truck that runs on diesel. It gets sent somewhere. How do you put up a wind turbine? Well, go look at it sometime. I mean, there's dozens of diesel-powered vehicles out there. So, again, my point isn't that we shouldn't do this or we can't do it, but most people just don't have the information, nor necessarily should they, to understand this is a system. It's a complex system. All human systems are. And it's just not that simple to say, okay, it's a light switch and we're going to turn it on and turn it. Well, no, there's a lot going on there. What about all the people who rely on truck traffic for their living? I mean, people that run hotels and restaurants and, God knows what else. Well, they're all going to go out of business. Whoops. And here's the big one. The big one is that we currently have a planet with a population of 7.5 billion people.
Yeah.
And how is it possible that Earth can support 7.5 billion people? And the answer is real simple. It's called fertilizer. And what's fertilizer made from? It's made from natural gas. Period. End of conversation.
Yeah.
Are there other ways to make fertilizer? Probably. Are they cost efficient? No. And so you want to go off of fossil energy, and that's fine. If you look back to when the world didn't use fertilizer, and that was before World War I, the world population was a little bit over 2 billion. So I'm not saying that we're going to go to 2 billion. You know, maybe our let's be very generous. Let's say that we're smart enough and technologically savvy enough that we can do twice as well as the world did in 1920, and we can support 4 billion people without fertilizer. Awesome. That means that only 3.5 billion people need to die.
Wow.
I mean, seriously, guys, I mean, is that, have you thought about that? And the answer is, of course, you haven't thought about that. Nor could you have thought about that. But the people that are pushing us to go in that direction really need to have thought about that. I mean, that is, I mean, let's be less dramatic. Let's say that all those people don't need to die. Let's just say that their lives become stressed because of lack of food and you name it. What happens? They move. All right. You know, we saw a little problem, a big problem in Syria that began a decade ago. And, you know, I mean, David, you would know better than I would. I mean, how many approximately Syrians migrated to other countries? You know, 1 million or 2?
It's about 3.5.
Very good. I knew you'd know the answer. Thank you.
Around.
3.5 million people moved mostly to Europe, and that put tremendous pressure and strain on everything in Europe, on their politics, on their social structure, on just certain countries' ability to even economically accommodate these people. That's 3.5 million people. I'm talking 3.5 billion people.
Wow.
I mean, the kind of social disruption, not to mention
and where would they go?
conflict.
I mean, looking at this as being a global problem, where would 3 billion people migrate to?
Well, they go to wherever they thought they could earn a living, which is the country.
Well, but
and you're not going to build a wall to keep them out. I mean,
well, that's why it would be fair to say that oil is here to stay, no matter what.
Well, in some form or other. But my point, David, is that whether or not oil is here to stay, those who sincerely believe it needs to go, they need to understand what it is, what the consequences of that are. Not to change their mind, but to show them that it's just not that simple, guys. If you want to do this, let's make sure we understand what we're getting ourselves into here. I mean, just to be very blunt about it, are you willing to return to a standard of living that you had, or your parents had, or your grandparents had in 1970? Now, I mean, I was alive in 1970 and my life was pretty good, but I mean, you know, we didn't live in a house like I live in right now. We didn't have the number of cars. I mean, that's a significant, I mean, that's a haircut, to use the financial term. That's a big haircut. And are we willing to do that? Most people, I would argue, would say, no, I'm not willing to do that. All right, so now we have a world that is massively indebted. I mean, on all levels. And the way that we pay the debt is we keep interest rates low, and basically money now is a note. It's a loan, right? It's not backed by anything. And so if the economy stops growing, then you can't pay your bills. Governments can't pay their bills. I can't pay my bills. And so we're talking about a global economic collapse or a financial collapse if economic growth ceases. And even though now it's slowed, and just the slowing has resulted in all sorts of financial problems for the world. Again, I'm not trying to persuade anyone to do anything here. I'm begging people to ask yourselves, have you thought about the consequences?
Well,
that's really a world that you're prepared to live in. Because if not, we need to get together and talk about it differently. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and that is the reason why. That is the reason why, for example, we thought of art right away for our viewers to have a different perspective, because I'm included as well. I mean, I thought of what if scenarios. You're absolutely correct, Art, because if there is no, as you well put it, it's a system. And when you have a system, there are so many moving parts to make the system efficient. And yes, there are those who are arguing loudly, let's do this way or that way, without thinking of the consequences.
Right. And I think that's a core value actually of this channel, is to bring that type of discussion to light. This is an ugly situation. This is a situation that is way more complex than I think very many people are giving it credit for. But the reality is we need a better solution. And the only way that, at least I believe, that can happen is through actual conversation with real facts.
And with people who so one of the things I believe I said in Miami at the meeting you referenced was that we live in a world that's dominated by islands of reductionist experts in an ocean of system thought. And so we get all these experts, and and their expertise is, I know everything about solar panels. The price has gone down. They're, pretty soon they're going to be paying you to take a solar panel, blah, blah, blah. That's great. All that may be true, but there's no connection among all these islands of reductionist experts. And every reductionist expert knows exactly what the answer is for his little part of the world. But, who is looking at all the islands and archipelagos and the ocean and saying, well, wait a minute, we need to think of a way of bringing all this together. And the answer is darn few people. And that's not a criticism. That's just a fact. That's an observation. And we cannot make these wholesale societal and economic changes without looking at the system as a whole. We're still going to screw it up. I promise you.
Human nature, Art.
Absolutely human nature.
But not as badly as if at least we try to anticipate, as you said correctly, David, what moving parts get affected by making this change. We have to do that.
Yeah, absolutely correct. Well, I have one more question, my last question here before we let you go, Art, because I know you're busy with your stuff as well. And my question pertains to OPEC, just for our viewers to know what OPEC is the oil producing exporting countries. Right. So there are some analysts arguing, Art, that OPEC is becoming irrelevant. Is there any truth to that?
People have been making that argument since about 1960 when OPEC formed.
So it's still here.
All I would ask you to do is all those people that are saying OPEC is irrelevant, call them up the next time OPEC is having a meeting, whether in Vienna or on Zoom, and ask them what they're doing. They're breathlessly following what the OPEC ministers are talking about. So if OPEC is irrelevant and doesn't matter anymore, then why aren't you out playing golf or doing something that's more relevant to you? Why are you glued to chat rooms and TV screens? And again, I'm not here to defend OPEC, but I mean, here is a group of countries that roughly control 35 or 40% of the oil supply in the world. And how can you say, I mean, sure, we can criticize, their effectiveness, their fractional behavior, but how can you just say, oh, that's irrelevant? I mean, you can't. You just can't do that. And OPEC, I would argue, under their present presumptive leadership, Abdulaziz bin Salman, I think he is the most effective person that has been in that place, probably since the 1980s or so. I mean, he has been extremely effective at keeping everybody disciplined and, doing whatever they're supposed to do. The fact that they got into a little bit of trouble here with the United Arab Emirates, that's understandable. But No, OPEC is not irrelevant. We can criticize them in many ways, but they are not irrelevant, nor will they ever be irrelevant as long as the world economy runs on oil.
Wow. Well, that's very, very interesting. Anything to add, Elizabeth?
No, that was wonderful.
Yeah. Well, Art, we want to truly thank you and on behalf of the entire team here. And I am sure our viewers will certainly benefit from these insights that they cannot get anywhere else. That is one of the reasons why we're very excited to have you here on show. And I'm sure we're going to be calling on you, Art. There's a lot to talk about in the energy market. So
I appreciate the opportunity, and I would just add, you know, I've written comprehensible articles on things like net zero, why it's a gross delusion. And they're free. And if you just go to artberman.com, you can, there's paid stuff on there, but there's a lot of free stuff on there. I talk about climate change, you know, and my views on that. I talk about OPEC.
Yeah.
So, you know, if your viewers are interested in hearing more, it won't cost them a dime. All they have to do is register, and they can get it all my stuff.
Yeah.
Perfect. We will have the link in the description box below. It will also be up on the screen if you guys would like to go and check those out. Also, Art, do you have social media?
I do, and the best place to find me there is at AE Berman 12 on Twitter. I probably put out 7 to 15 posts of some sort or other every day. A lot of them are just articles I think people ought to read, but I never just put them out there. I always say, you know, this is what's important here. I give it a little summary, and if I think, you know, the guy is full of you-know-what, I'll say, you know, amateur hour, guys. Read it and laugh, or I disagree, or whatever. No disrespect.
Yeah.
You know, I think people have a hard time sometimes forming an opinion about something that's a little bit outside of their expertise. So I view my role as, you know, like the guy who comes on Masterpiece Theater and says, "This is what you're going to see." So at AE Berman 12, and I'm on there all the time. So.
Perfect. That will also be a link in the description box, and we will put it on the screen for you guys if you would love to follow Art on Twitter. Thank you guys so much. Thank you to Art. Thank you for watching. If you would please subscribe to our channel, it helps the channel out so much. Please hit that like button and comment and let us know what you think.
And as always, stay informed. Till next time. Bye-bye.